Welcome back. I want to take you back to Africa, where, as we mentioned earlier, celebrations have been going on all week to mark the 50th anniversary of the Organization of African Unity, OAU, which a decade ago became the African Union. Festivities both at home and in the diaspora have taken place in the backdrop of fear, insecurity, and uncertainty in parts of the continent. Gun battles on the streets of Mogadishu, Somalia, combat in the deserts of Mali, rebels killing and raping women in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Islamic militants attacking and threatening in Nigeria. These are the reports the world is likely to hear about Africa.
Our government is unable to secure her citizens, and the bloodshed has been the order of the day in that town.
Insecurity and instability remain closely associated with the continent, even as it marches on 50 years after most countries attained independence from colonial rulers. Some will argue, though, that Africa is made up of over 50 nations, and most of them are peaceful, stable, and progressive. In countries such as Nigeria, where for many years change of leadership typically came through the gun, as one general overthrew another, elected civilian leaders are now handing over power to other elected civilians, and the military is staying in the barracks. Still, the sense of stability and peace has at times proved fragile and even deceptive. It was the case in Kenya in 2008. A peaceful country exploded into horrific chaos overnight following a dispute over results of an otherwise peaceful election. More than 1,000 people were killed, women were raped, and hundreds of thousands were displaced from their homes as peace seemed to have instantaneously left the country. Peace was restored, but even 5 years later, Kenyans still remain apprehensive about the future of their nation, especially when they think of elections in the Democratic Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, Somalia, South Sudan, Nigeria, and Mali. Citizens are waiting for peace and stability to reign supreme. In the rest of the continent, many look across the borders to their neighbors and wonder just how long the peace and stability in their own countries will hold. Well, for more perspective, I'm joined in the studio by Assis Malaquias, a professor and academic chair, Defense Economics and Resource Management at the African Center for Strategic Studies at the National Defense University. Welcome, Dr. Malaquias. Now, the African leaders in Addis Ababa will tell you that Africa is a more peaceful and secure continent today than it was, say, 10, 20 years ago. What's your assessment, very briefly?
They're right. They're right if they're talking about the number of wars on the continent and the numbers of people dying as a consequence of those wars. There's been a decline. If you look at when the OAU at the time was created back in 1963, and through the 1970s and into the 1990s, there was a crescendo. Wars were going up. Well, that reached its peak in 1993. Since then, wars have been on the decline.
And you know, the most typical thing about Africa is that we haven't seen interstate wars, but we're seeing instabilities within individual countries. What hasn't changed in those countries where we're seeing that?
Well, the dynamics of insecurity that Africa inherited from colonialism have not really changed much. As you know very well, Africa is made up of diverse communities. In fact, some people will even say diverse nations within the states. And they have not really found ways, always peaceful, to relate to each other. So those dynamics have not really changed. And in addition to that, the expectations of independence have not been fulfilled.
We're talking about 50 years later. What is it that African leaders must do if the next few years will define a more peaceful continent?
In one word, governance. African leaders need to refocus on governance, need to ensure that all citizens have their basic needs fulfilled, number one. Number two, related to that, that citizens do not feel a sense of marginalization. All African citizens must feel a sense that they belong to the state. They belong to all of the good things that the state can provide.
Can you briefly mention a case where a country that was unstable and insecure has managed to get things together today?
Certainly, there are many countries. Many countries that have gone through wars are now putting things together. I can name a country like Mozambique, a country like Namibia, a country like Angola, indeed, a country like Ethiopia. There are many countries. There are many countries in Africa that have gone through wars and now they're putting things together. But there's a spectrum. Some countries are doing things much better than others. Those countries that are focusing more on governance, they're doing much, much better.
So it's a question of governance, and those that are not doing well should look across to their neighbors to see how they can learn lessons. Thank you very much, Dr. Malaquias, for joining us here today. And now, Dr. Assis Malaquias, a professor at the African Center for Strategic Studies, National Defense University. Thanks.